June 4th, 1943, Mexia, Texas, 10 o'clock at night. Unteroffizier Werner Burkhardt pressed his face against the train window and wrote 5 words in his hidden diary that would have earned him solitary confinement. The Americans are lying to us. But they weren't lying at all. Through that window, he was witnessing the death of everything the Third Reich had taught him. Electric lights blazed from every farmhouse, every street corner, every shop window. An endless constellation of electricity stretching across the Texas plains, while Germany had been plunged into blackout darkness since 1940. These weren't the weak, decadent Americans he'd been promised. These were people who left the lights burning carelessly, wastefully, infinitely. As die Bothelsstation 50 veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps stepped down from their Pullman coaches, not cattle cars, but cushioned passenger trains with dining service, they were about to undergo the most devastating defeat of their lives. Not on any battlefield, but in the grocery stores, factories, and farm fields of America. They had arrived as Nazi warriors. They would leave as apostles of democracy. The story begins with mockery. When the first German prisoners arrived at American camps in 1943, they maintained the arrogance that had carried them across Europe. America, they'd been told by Goebbels himself, was a mongrel nation, racially impure, controlled by Jews, soft, weak, incapable of matching German martial spirit. Even in defeat, even as prisoners, they clung to their superiority. At Camp Hearn, Texas, the prisoners initially refused to believe their surroundings were typical. The barracks with electric lights, flush toilets, and hot showers. This had to be propaganda, a show camp designed to impress. Real America, they assured each other, couldn't possibly maintain such standards while fighting a two-front war. Feldwebel Hans Müller wrote to his wife, "They feed us white bread to mock us, to show what they have. But I know it's temporary. No nation can sustain such waste." He would later burn this letter in shame, because the white bread never stopped coming. Neither did the meat, or the vegetables, or the ice cream. The propaganda meals continued day after day, month after month, each one an unanswerable argument against everything they believed. The Wehrmacht's elite had been trained to recognize deception. These were veterans who'd conquered France in 6 weeks, who'd driven the British to Dunkirk, who'd nearly taken Moscow. They knew military theater when they saw it. So, when American guards casually threw away half-eaten sandwiches, the Germans cataloged it as psychological warfare. When they saw parking lots full of workers' cars, they assumed they'd been gathered for show. When every farm they passed had electricity, they believed they were being driven along specially prepared routes. The alternative, that America actually functioned at this level of abundance, was simply impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stauffenberg, whose aristocratic family had served Prussia for 3 centuries, articulated the German assumption. They are showing us their best to hide their worst. This is classic deception. We did the same in Berlin when foreign diplomats visited. But doubt crept in through the details, the wear patterns on the workers' cars, the casual indifference of civilians who didn't even glance at German prisoners, the sheer geographic scope of the prosperity. You could fake a showpiece camp. You couldn't fake an entire continent. The turning point came not through any single revelation, but through the crushing weight of accumulated evidence. Each prisoner experienced their own moment of ideological collapse. For Obergefreiter Ernst Hoffmann, it happened at a Campbell soup factory in New Jersey. He watched a single production line process more tomatoes in an hour than his entire village saw in a year. The facility was running at half capacity. Most workers were fighting overseas. Women and old men managed machinery that would have required dozens of German workers. And this was just one factory. They told him there were hundreds more. For Unteroffizier Paul Weber, the revelation came in a Kansas wheat field. He stood atop a combine harvester, a single machine doing the work of 100 men, and looked out at wheat stretching beyond the horizon. The farmer mentioned, almost apologetically, that this was just his middle field. He had 3 larger ones. This one farmer, this nobody from Kansas, controlled more grain than entire German provinces. When Weber asked how many farms like this existed in America, the farmer laughed. "Hell, son, every other section from here to Colorado." The German prisoners had been told that democracy bred chaos, that racial mixing created weakness, that capitalism meant a few rich exploiting, many poor. Instead, they found ordinary workers living better than German party officials. They found Black Americans operating complex machinery in factories. They found Jewish professors teaching German prisoners physics. They found women building bombers. Every observation shattered another Nazi certainty. But perhaps the most devastating revelation was the waste. Americans threw away food that Germans would have killed for. Perfectly good fruit discarded for minor blemishes. Entire harvests plowed under to maintain prices. Mountains of orange peels outside juice factories. For men whose families were surviving on 1,200 calories a day in Germany, watching Americans discard food became psychological torture. Not because it was cruel, but because it was thoughtless. The guards didn't throw away food to torment prisoners. They threw it away because, to them, food was infinite. Gefreiter Otto Schmidt worked at a meatpacking plant in Kansas City. In his secret diary, discovered decades later, he calculated that the single plant where he worked processed more beef in a week than his entire region of Bavaria saw in a year. The workers ate meat sandwiches for lunch, thick with beef that would have fed a German family for a week. When Schmidt mentioned this to a guard, the American apologized that the meat wasn't better quality. During peacetime, he said, we'd have better cuts. The transformation accelerated as prisoners gained glimpses of American war production. At the Higgins shipyard in New Orleans, German POWs unloaded steel for landing craft. They watched as workers assembled 30 boats per day. Each boat required 20,000 parts from suppliers across America. The factory ran 24 hours, 7 days a week. Women welded hulls. Teenagers operated drill presses. The entire operation resembled nothing so much as an enormous clock, each worker a gear, the whole mechanism producing invasion craft with the regularity of a heartbeat. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, an engineer before the war, understood the implications immediately. He wrote, "This single factory produces more landing craft in a month than our entire Navy built in 3 years. And they tell us there are 7 more such factories. The Americans are not building for a war. They are building for 10 wars." The numbers defied comprehension. America was producing a bomber every 63 minutes, a Liberty ship every 42 hours, 2.6 million trucks, 88,000 tanks, 286,000 aircraft. The prisoners learned these figures not from propaganda broadcasts, but from casual conversation with guards who read them in newspapers. The statistics weren't secret. They weren't even special. They were Tuesday's news, forgotten by Thursday when new, larger numbers appeared. By Christmas 1943, the psychological transformation was evident in every camp. The prisoners who had arrived 6 months earlier, as convinced Nazis, were writing essays about democracy. They were taking courses in American history. They were learning English with desperate intensity. They weren't just defeated soldiers anymore. They were students of a system that had proven itself superior in every measurable way. Christmas itself delivered perhaps the most crushing blow to Nazi ideology. American churches and civic groups sent 500,000 gift packages to German prisoners. Enemies who had been killing Americans months earlier received candy, cigarettes, games, and toiletries from American civilians. The local Methodist church in Mexia sang Christmas carols in German. Boy Scouts delivered handmade cards. When prisoners protested that they didn't deserve such kindness, Americans replied that Christmas was about forgiveness. Oberleutnant Walter Muller, whose brother had died in the Hamburg firebombing, wrote, "They know we are their enemies. Many have sons fighting our armies. Yet they show us Christian charity. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory. Or, perhaps, those who never really saw us as enemies at all, just young men far from home." The camp newspapers tell the story of transformation in real time. In July 1943, Der Ruf, the POW newspaper at Fort Kearny, published defiant articles about German superiority and inevitable victory. By December, it was running pieces about democratic governance and industrial agriculture. By March 1944, it featured essays about rebuilding Germany as a democratic state. The progression wasn't forced. American authorities simply provided paper and printing presses. The transformation came from the prisoners themselves. D-Day, June 6, 1944, marked the final phase of psychological capitulation. When newsreels showed the invasion's scale, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave, German prisoners finally understood. This wasn't even America's maximum effort. This was what America could casually organize while simultaneously fighting in the Pacific, supplying the Soviet Union and feeding Britain. The workshops and factories they had observed hadn't been working desperately to produce this invasion. They'd been working normally. Hauptmann Friedrich Voss watched the newsreel 3 times. He later wrote, "We saw our homeland being invaded by the nation we'd been told was too weak to fight. Every landing craft carried more supplies than a German regiment. Every soldier was better equipped than our elite troops. The Americans had made invasion industrial. They had turned war into manufacturing. We never had a chance." By 1945, the transformation was complete. Over 370,000 German prisoners had witnessed American society functioning at its peak. They had seen democracy creating prosperity. They had experienced enemies treating them with dignity. They had watched women and minorities contributing to victories. They had observed waste that proved abundance and kindness that proved confidence. Every single aspect of American life refuted Nazi ideology, not through argument, but through existence. The re-education program's success exceeded every expectation, but it succeeded not through propaganda, but through reality. The prisoners weren't told America was superior. They saw it. They weren't lectured about democracy. They witnessed it functioning. They weren't taught about industrial capacity. They calculated it from what they observed. America had won the ideological war not through clever messaging, but through the overwhelming evidence of daily life. When Gefreiter Hans Weber worked on an Iowa farm, the farmer's wife packed him the same lunch she gave her husband. When his guard learned Weber's son had been killed in Berlin, he arranged for the Red Cross to deliver food packages to Weber's widow, in a city America was actively bombing. When Weber asked why, the guard seemed confused by the question. "She's not fighting us. She's just a mother trying to feed her kids." Dr. Arnold Kramer, the leading historian of German POWs in America, calculated that the program cost $120 million to operate but generated $230 million in labor value. The prisoners maintained farms, harvested crops, and worked in non-military factories, filling crucial gaps left by American men overseas. But the true value was immeasurable. America had converted 370,000 enemy soldiers into future allies without firing a shot. The statistics of transformation speak volumes. Of 371,683 German POWs, fewer than 1% attempted escape. Most who did flee were recaptured within hours, usually at the nearest restaurant, having underestimated the sheer size of Texas. Post-war surveys showed 74% of prisoners believed their captivity had fundamentally changed their worldview. More remarkably, thousands maintained correspondence with American families for decades. Some sent their children to visit the families who had shown them kindness as prisoners. When the war ended in May 1945, the prisoners faced repatriation with complex emotions. They had experienced an America that made their homeland look primitive. They had eaten better as prisoners than as soldiers. They had been treated with more dignity by enemies than by their own government. They were returning to a destroyed nation with the knowledge of how to rebuild it. Hans Kroll, captured in Tunisia, imprisoned at Camp Shelby, later became West Germany's ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, who taught fellow prisoners at Camp Como, became president of the European Commission. Bert Trautmann, captured in France, imprisoned in Lancashire, became Manchester City's legendary goalkeeper. These weren't isolated cases. Thousands of former prisoners became bridges between Germany and the Western Allies. The final measure of the program's success came at a 1985 reunion in Austin, Texas. 500 former German POWs returned to America, many bringing children and grandchildren to show them where their transformation began. Former Oberst Hermann Goetz, then 78, delivered the keynote address. "We came as conquerors and left as students. We arrived believing in racial superiority and departed understanding human dignity. We thought strength came from conquest. We learned it came from production. We were shown that democracy wasn't weakness, but the confident strength of free people. America's greatest weapon wasn't its bombs or tanks, but its inexhaustible capacity for creation. You didn't defeat just our armies. You defeated our ideas, and for that liberation, we thank you. The auditorium erupted in sustained applause. Americans and Germans standing together, former enemies now allies, proof that the most profound victories are won not through destruction, but through demonstration. The German POWs had arrived in America expecting to find a hollow nation propped up by propaganda. Instead, they discovered an industrial colossus of unlimited power and surprising humanity. They witnessed American workers outproducing German slaves. They saw American farmers feeding the world, while German civilians starved. They experienced American democracy functioning, while German totalitarianism collapsed. Every electric light, every wasted sandwich, every freely expressed opinion was an argument against Nazism that required no words. In the end, America's secret weapon wasn't military might, but the simple, overwhelming evidence of what free people could achieve. The German prisoners were stunned by American abundance, but more importantly, they were converted by it. They returned to Germany not as defeated enemies, but as witnesses to possibility. The economic miracle that rebuilt West Germany in the 1950s was constructed on foundations laid in American prison camps, where Nazi soldiers learned that prosperity came from freedom, dignity from democracy, and strength from diversity. The story of German POWs in America proves that the most complete victories are achieved not on battlefields, but in minds. America had transformed its greatest enemies into its future allies through the simple act of letting them watch democracy function. The men who stepped off those trains in Texas in 1943 as Nazi warriors stepped onto ships in 1946 as democratic citizens. They had seen America, and they would never be the same. Their transformation from mockery to humility, from superiority to education, from enemies to allies, remains one of the most complete ideological victories in human history, achieved not through force or propaganda, but through the undeniable, overwhelming, infinite fact of American abundance. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.